Words about his experience.
Woo! Woo! Yeah, Christopher!
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Chris Dorn, and I am coming up on being 8 years removed from opioid addiction.
Woo!
Truth be told, I had a lot of help from my friends and family. So today I want to advocate for those who have been denied that luxury and have had it much harder than I. It is with both a glimmer of hope and a heavy heart that I felt compelled to be here today. I grow more despondent every time a friend I grew up with passes. It pains me to see how exponential is the speed at which this epidemic grows, especially when I scroll through social media and see constant posts containing the words "rest in peace." And I even feel anger, born of frustration, whenever the news covers a story stating the opioid epidemic continues to reach new highs, with evidence of prescription abuse and heroin cut with dangerous substances such as fentanyl, taking lives like a chemical weapon dispersed among our youth. In the time of my struggle, the need for action wasn't as dire. But being among all of you gives me hope that an effort is underway to catch up. We are here today to spread awareness. With my story and the insight gained through my experiences, I hope to reach out to fellow victims and perhaps help their families begin to fathom the complicated mind of an addict, so that maybe my advice can help someone care for a loved one in turmoil. However, my story isn't the worst you'll hear. I'm sure you've heard some worse stories tonight, and it pales in comparison to the stories I've witnessed throughout my life as an addict, as a client in mental health services for many years, and now as an employee in a related field. I am still alive and well, and therefore feel it is my duty to share what I have learned. Opioid addiction is the pernicious weed that spreads throughout our communities and strangles the life it touches. It is the cartoon devil on the shoulder, interfering with good judgment, and I have had enough. We have had enough. In our nation's current political environment, we don't agree on much. On some issues, lines are drawn based on race, religion, economic class, gender, and even age. However, this epidemic affects all walks of life, and I believe it to be the perfect cause for us to rally behind, united and determined.
Woo!
The ominous and destructive nature of opioid addiction does not discriminate. Even if you're not an addict, chances are you know someone who is. Unlike others I've known and used with, I didn't come from a broken home. My parents weren't addicts of any sort, and I'm fortunate enough to have a large supportive family. That didn't matter in the beginning. I still fell into the habit because I chose to self-medicate with pills and other substances after countless medications did very little to combat my severe anxiety and depression. And to my detriment, I kept my addiction secret until it was almost too late. The pills aren't cheap on the street, and there are limits to how many a single doctor will prescribe. So many addicts resort to heroin for a better high at a cheaper rate. This trap was far too common among my friends and I. And after a heart-wrenching breakup with my girlfriend at the time, I went headfirst into abusing opioids and turned to the insidious embrace of the needle. I had suffered my first split from a serious relationship at a young age, and it felt like the end of the world at the time. Woe is me. I was very good at playing the victim and building on resentment without any regard for anyone's feelings, save my own. At that point, my motto was live fast and die young. I played guitar in a band, in fact, right down the street. So there were countless opportunities to live up to this motto. In the music scene, substance abuse is not only tolerated, but almost celebrated. I tried every drug I could get my hands on, but there was nothing that took my pain and sadness away like opioids. I was having fun, and it was actually functioning rather well for a period of time. I held a full-time job, band practice twice a week, made tons of friends at gigs and parties, but it was all artificial and soon came crashing down. There comes a point when the fun stops, and the addict only uses out of misguided necessity so that they won't suffer withdrawal. I wouldn't wish the effects of withdrawal on my worst enemy. It is truly the worst combination of physical and mental anguish I've ever experienced. So it is the fear of facing it and the need to sustain the habit that drives some addicts to do things that would have been unthinkable to them previously. For example, I began stealing from my family and friends and pawning my once treasured possessions to sustain my habit. Countless burnt bridges were left in my wake on my daily struggle to avoid sickness. I had lost control of myself, but my family was not yet aware. Being 1 out of 7 children, it is easy to fly under the radar when you want to. Whenever I wasn't in denial, I tried psyching myself into quitting on my own and in secret. I was trying to be mindful of triggers, people, places, things. So I thought it best that I simply leave town to a place where I didn't know anyone. I decided to go away to Ohio for a 2-month course at an audio engineering school where I would live on campus. I figured the withdrawal would take its course and I would just tough it out while learning a trade I thought I'd enjoy. I had a few days before class started when I arrived and the withdrawal had already begun. I had no comprehension of how bad it would get. I had suffered withdrawal before, but not since turning to the needle. I'll spare you the details. But it got so extreme that I became more suicidal than any time in my life previously. One night, in a rare moment of clarity, I made the decision to call an ambulance. An hour later, I was in the ER and the nurse handed me the phone so I could make the most difficult phone call of my entire life. Mom, I'm addicted to heroin. I was alone in a strange state with no familiar faces, terrified and curled up in a fetal position on my hospital bed, suffering. This was my rock bottom. It was after that when I began to confront my feelings of guilt and shame, because now my family knew. Everyone would know. And some counselors of any addiction would say, when you quit, do it for yourself. This wasn't enough for me. I didn't care enough about myself. It was a different motivation that inspired me to take the first steps into recovery. In the span of my addiction, 4 of my nephews and 2 nieces were born. Their first years of life were regrettably a blur to me. Then they started developing personalities, walking, talking, wanting attention from their goofy uncle. Then it struck me, perhaps not all at once, perhaps throughout my stay in rehab, I did not want my nieces and nephews to end up hearing about their one uncle who got arrested, or worse, overdosed and died. Then I realized getting sober wasn't just about me. I wouldn't be the only victim. If I died, it would impact my family and social circle in horrific ways. Eventually, during my recovery, I did care about myself and added that to my growing list of motivating factors. I just needed an extra push or spark, an external factor to get things started, something every addict should find when love of self is lacking, like the birth of an innocent child or the death of a loved one, or the purest of reasons, faith. I focused in on those factors and did my best to stay out of trouble. From there, it has been a long and difficult road. The feeling of liberation I was soon welcomed with was a natural high with which no substance could compete. It took a while, but I eventually gained back the trust of my friends and family. With hard work, support, willpower, a little luck, and the prayers of others on my behalf, I got my life back. After a few years, I returned to that school in Ohio and completed the course. But I soon realized my career interests lie in mental health, since I believe addiction and mental health are very much intertwined. During my recovery, I tried helping a few friends overcome their struggles. It made me feel good to help others, even though sometimes the help wasn't always welcomed. I took one friend in particular under my wing as sort of her unofficial sponsor. She came from a broken home. Her father introduced her to heroin at 13 years old. I guess because misery loves company. Her dad moved away and her mother became an alcoholic. My friend had been in and out of treatment repeatedly and nothing seemed to work. I took this as a personal challenge. She was my friend, and I didn't want to give up on her like others had. So we made a deal. I would drive her to clinics, meetings, doctor's appointments, court appearances. I would most importantly be her shoulder to lean on and lend a sympathetic ear. I would do this, so long as she remained clean. She didn't keep her end of the deal. I expected a few slip-ups because I know the nature of addiction well, but they became many. I tried confronting her about getting high on multiple occasions, and each time it ended up in a fight where she pushed me away for a time. This went on for about 2 years. It was becoming an unhealthy friendship for both of us. I was starting to worry about my own stability and sobriety as she continued to decline. We had one more fight about another relapse before we cut ties. I refused to help any further, and she was happy to be rid of my guidance that she felt was nothing more than a nuisance. I deleted her number. I blocked her on social media. I was overcome with frustration over it. I just wanted to help. A year later, I get a phone call from a mutual friend telling me that she died of an overdose. I couldn't even grieve because I didn't know how to process the mixed emotions. Should I have done more? Should I have done less? Should I have done nothing at all? Truth is, I still don't know the answer to these questions, but what I have learned from that experience is that treating or confronting an addict is an extremely fragile process. If you push too hard, they pull away. If you do nothing, they self-destruct. It's a delicate balance. I also learned that I would be better off helping others in a clinical or professional setting where I can effectively set boundaries for my own well-being as well. She wasn't the first of my friends' lives to be claimed, and she wasn't the last. I remember getting high with friends who had a bit too much. Their faces would turn blue and they'd stop breathing, and I would have to shake and slap them back into consciousness. But it didn't faze us. We went to the city the next day to do it again. What is most disturbing to me is that an addict can literally witness firsthand the overdose and death of a friend, and the disease will do the most extreme mental gymnastics to try and justify continued use. This is an example of how tight heroin holds its victims. I emphasize this in the hopes that people don't judge the individual and rather point the finger at the illness. Stigma is something we often talk about in mental health, and I've taken a unique approach to confronting society about my past by simply pretending the stigma does not exist. Since getting help, I have been extremely open to discussing my addiction. Even if people judge me at first, it at least gives me the opportunity to express what I've learned from it and how I turn things around. People are less likely to judge you for where you've been if you show them where you're going. My path to recovery was somewhat unorthodox. I didn't finish 12 steps. I didn't have a sponsor. Just rehab and a few outpatient services. I relied mostly on family and staying off the grid so old friends couldn't contact me. Unfortunately, there are many addicts not afforded the privilege of a family environment that's conducive to stability. Some have no family at all. If you or anyone you know falls into this category, I suggest reaching out to a professional and following whatever steps necessary to gain a robust network of support and utilizing it to its maximum potential. Sobriety is very seldom achieved without help, and even harder to sustain. But I realized every person responds differently to any method of treatment. I've known rehab to work for some and not others. NA and AA works for some and not others. Methadone or Suboxone works for some and not others. I wish I could point to one method that works for all, but there is no such thing. The best advice I can give to an addict receptive to change is to take a hard look in the mirror and contemplate your future, however unpleasant it feels. Take responsibility for your actions. Be honest with yourself and your care providers. If one type of treatment doesn't work, try another. Hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Expect to fall down, perhaps quite a bit. But if you should fall forward instead of backward, and rise again with an evolved understanding of what took you off your feet. Finally, I would like to thank everyone who made this event possible. Awareness is the theme, so let nobody slide with claiming ignorance on this matter. But awareness itself is not enough. There has to be action. I have no clue in what form that action should take, but as a collective comprised of concerned citizens, people of faith, care providers, law enforcement, and our government officials, we must define an organized effort to confront this escalating wave of death. In the meantime, look out for one another. And if you know anybody that needs help, speak up. Be a champion for those who have lost the will to fight. Thank you so much for listening.